Hello, and welcome to our session today, hosted by the Kixis Group in IDA North America, where we will be showcasing the Object Manager Advanced tool from IDA. The OMA tool is a developer tool on the Microsoft Dynamics Navision product that has been adopted by approximately 3/4 of the NAV developers in Europe. It hasn't had the same adoption in North America, so we started the IDA North America team to help bring some of these products to the NAV and BC customers that we have here locally. My name is Nick Detmer, and I'll be hosting today's session and will be available in the chat to answer questions directly. Presenting with me today is my colleague Floyd Chan, a longtime developer leader in the NAV community. Floyd?
My name is Floyd Chan. I am the North American representative for the IDA group, and I'm here actually talking to you from Toronto, Canada today, and I will be walking through this presentation of Object Manager Advanced to talk about some of the features and functionality that is in the current version, version 13, and to talk briefly about some of the things that are coming out into version 14 as well, which is due to come out this fall as part of the release that Microsoft is also coming out with Business Central. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. We are going to be talking about a number of different components in the product. I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual PowerPoint points here because we will be looking at some of these points as we go into the product. So primarily we're going to be talking about things like CAL and AL, where used, guideline checking. We're going to be looking at object history, the ability to switch from development environment to development environment, and looking at different aspects to allow you to get into the application, the code, and quickly figure out where you are and what can you do. Let's just spend a moment and talk a little bit about what has been happening with the product as far as NAV, Business Central is going on, and where we as developers need to go. So first off, you all may remember, if some of you are coming back from or coming from an older version of NAV, especially the old classic version, Navision and Microsoft, when it acquired Navision, used to provide a development tool called the Development Toolkit, which was available up to NAV 2009 R2. And those of you who have used that product probably know it very well and love it. And I, in my background, I've been working with NAV now for over 20 years, also loved that product. So that was the NAV Developer Toolkit. And it gave you all sorts of capabilities inside the product. It was an add-on, all written in Cal code. You could import it into a Navision database, and it allowed you to basically parse the code inside Navision in such a way that you as a developer could go in and analyze the code, the keys, where were they used, and really be able to navigate throughout the product from an application perspective. Right? Now, as of NAV 2009, that product went away. Right? So no longer available. So this is where Object Manager Advanced stepped in. Object Manager Advanced is essentially the equivalent of the Developer Toolkit, but on steroids. All right. So for those of you who have not had a chance to use the product, this will give you a little bit of an idea of what it is that Object Manager Advanced is. So at this point, let's just do this. Let's just jump in very quickly, and let's just jump into the Object Designer. So here we are. What I have currently, this is Business Central Spring Release version 14, and I'm currently in the development client. By the way, I have all of this running inside a container. So this is running on my local desktop and surfacing through the container interface. So here I have my Object Designer. So I'm sure that all of you know this quite well and love it, and you're very comfortable, right? This is all our Seaside interface and our ability to go into any one of these objects, like the customer table here, be able to go into designer mode and be able to go in, add fields, as I have here earlier today. I added 2 fields, and also you could potentially drop in behind the actual schema of the table and get into the code and actually be able to write code or modify existing code. So this is an interface that we're all very comfortable with and very familiar with. All right. At this point, I'm going to jump into the actual Windows client. Now, I just happened to choose the Windows client. In this case, I could have also opened up the web client. In any case, here we are again. We are in Business Central version 14 spring release, and in this case I have the Windows client. And I could have opened up the web client, but I'm old school. I'm a little comfortable with the Windows client, but that's okay. Could have been the web client as well. And what you see currently is a brand new role center. So what I've done is, in the background, inside the development client, I'll show you this, is I've actually uploaded a number of objects. So if I expand this table up and I look at the tables and I go to the very end here, what you'll see is, if I go up into the ISV range here, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of tables here in the, I believe the 11,000 range or 1 million range. These are the Object Manager Advanced objects. And as you can see, they're installed right here into this database. And these objects, typically what you would do as a developer is you would install these into your development environment. So wherever you're writing your code or managing development, you would install these objects. These objects are independent of the actual objects that belong to the client or the application that you're building on top of. So there is no hooks into the actual underlying base code. All these objects live in the same database but are completely independent. Okay, so this is why when I go back to my Windows client and I open up the Windows client one more time, what I'm getting now, in essence, this would be my development environment that I'd be looking at. Okay, so essentially wherever my code is being written to. But now I actually have this role center available to me inside that database. Right? So we're going to spend some time exploring this role center. So first off, here on this role center, it gives me some high-level dashboard information about what's going on with my particular project and things that I can do to manage this project better. Okay, let's dig into some of these components. And today, because we only have an hour, I won't be able to go through all the possible features and functions. There's a real depth and richness here available to you as a developer. All right. However, we're going to focus on some of the real key points and some of the things that maybe you'll find extremely interesting, especially as we move forward into the new environment that Microsoft is pushing us all into. So first off, over here, I'm going to focus on this section called Objects. And let's take a look here at a section called Object Explorer. What you see now is essentially the same thing that you would have seen over in the Object Designer in the traditional development client. All right. This, in fact, is fully synchronized and is, in fact, tied into the Object Designer. So all the objects that you have access to in the Object Designer are also available here. This is exactly the same thing. All right. So from here, all the different objects are listed. Okay. So if I scroll down, all the tables, etc., all the pages, all the code units, everything's here. All right, so nothing is lost here. What I'm going to do now is select our good friend here, the customer table, table number 18, and I'm going to show you something very interesting that you can do. So from this particular table, I will go up here and I'm going to click on this function called where used. All right, it's just going to quickly just blow through the system, looking for any changes that I might have done over the last little bit. In any case, what I'm surfacing now is some of the components within the table 18, customer table. So at the very top, what you'll see here is information about the actual table object. But let me dive down here for a moment, and let's spend a little bit of time looking at some of the information down here. As you can see, here's some table triggers. Okay, your insert, modify, delete, rename. All right, and what's interesting over here is you can see that the insert for the customer table has actually been used 16 times throughout the application. And in fact, if you notice, it's a flow field. So I can in fact drill down on the 16, and now I can actually see the 16 places inside the code where the insert to the customer table was actually used. For example, on page 5471, customer entity, in the function on insert record, there's the code line, and it's in fact called with insert true. And if I actually wanted to see it, believe it or not, I can also come up here and say code. And at this point, I can actually see from within the OMA interface where that line of code actually exists within that object up here, page 5471 customer entity. And if I really wanted to go deeper, yes, I could actually call the designer right from here. So as you can see, it actually opens up my object designer, calls it directly, and I'll log in with my super secure Floyd, and password is Floyd, just so that I don't forget my password. And guess what? It actually takes me right to the object so that I can actually start looking at where that line of code is and perhaps where is it actually used, right? So, and yes, I could actually modify it, make changes, and save it, okay, right from here, okay? So actually develop in the development environment where you feel very comfortable, but basically we store all of the information about what's been done back here in Object Manager Advanced. Let me hit escape. I'm going to go backwards. I'll go all the way back to my Object Explorer here. So there's the 16 times the code was used. And in fact, of those 16 times, it was actually called with validation. So you can actually see there's with the true. Right? So if you really want to know when the trigger got called, you can actually see it. Down here, we also expose all the keys and where they used. All right. Notice these ones are in green. Green means that in this case, that they actually have not been used anywhere in the code. So yes, in fact, there are some extraneous keys inside the customer table. As you can see, all these currently are not used anywhere in the code. We get down into fields, and same thing. We can actually see for each one of these fields, how many times are they used throughout the base code. So for example, let's say I'm curious about the city field in the customer table. I can see it's used 76 times in the code, of which 6 of the times they're actually populating the field. So let's actually take a look here. So we can actually see the assignment of city values to the city field here in these 6 areas of the code. If I hit escape, go back one more. Of those 6, we call it twice with validation. So you can actually see there's with validate. All right, so again, you can home in on when the actual trigger is also being called and executed. Let me hit escape one more time, go back. So we're talking about some fields. I'll scroll down further and give you another glimpse of what else is down in here. In fact, we can also see that there are fields that are not used anywhere in the code. So that's quite interesting as well. Look at that. There's actually likely a flow field, balance on date, not used anywhere. We get into functions. All right, so you can see now we can also expose all the functions inside the object as well. And once again, can also see where those functions are being used. So show contact, for example, being used 6 times. Again, I can drill in on the 6. I can see where it's being called on show contact. And again, I could drill further so that I can actually navigate around and try to figure out what the perhaps the call stack might look like by clicking through and looking at the code. Over here, I also have a function that's in blue. You'll notice that this validate shortcut dim code function is called 2 places in the code. And if I drill down on the 2, what you'll actually see in this particular case is it's actually being called from the actual customer table. Well, if these two functions are being called from the customer table and not being called from anywhere else outside of the customer table, then likely instead of being a global function, this could be a local function. So the whole point of the blue here is also to identify potentially functions that could be local instead of global. So again, many bits of information that are being exposed to you so that you can actually make decisions and make your code better. All right. So as we were digging through here, I did demonstrate that, for example, if I wanted to, from here, I could open up the designer. So I'll just do that one more time. So I'll go into design mode just to show you one more time. And this time I'm in the customer table. What I'm actually going to do is I'll go down into the end here and I'll just insert a brand new field. Now, because this is a container and I probably I probably don't have this all set up in terms of me being able to push my objects up to my middle tier. I'll actually, I'll try it with force. Let's just see if it'll allow me. No, today is not my day, but that's okay. If you have this set up properly, then the objects will get forced up into the middle tier. Oh, okay, yes, that would help also. 1 second. Let me try that one more time. There we go. Okay. All right. Let's see if it'll let me do it. Okay. Okay. And let's just say yes. All right. It's going to bulk at it. No problem. I'll say it later, and we'll just save some time here. Okay. With the with that synchronization, which is a piece I'm missing in my container, what will happen immediately actually is that field number 2, my field number 3 with the Boolean type will show up here. So the synchronization between the development environment and this front end OMA tool is immediate. I'm just simply missing a configuration piece. In any case, once you have this in here and it is synchronized, the other part of this that now gets interesting is if I go backwards here, one more, let's just take a look here, is I can also say, let's take a look at the history of that particular object. Okay, and what it actually allows me to do now is look at the traceability of that table over time. And in the case that I actually managed to save that last object change, it would also show up here and record it. And it actually seems like it did. It's probably also some pieces I have to do between the back end to the front end. In any case, the actual object itself is saved. So what actually ends up happening here is not only is this a record for every time that you've made a modification to that particular object, but a snapshot of the object itself is actually saved against each one of these entries. So for example, in this particular modification that I did, I could also very easily select by holding down my control button here, let's say my original table entry here. So I've made 2 selections, and up at the top, I can actually say compare. And at this point, what it will do is actually open up your choice of comparison tool. In my case, I've got myself set up with Beyond Compare. And as you can see, I can actually see the differences between the code. So I have my ability now to take a look and look at the differences. So I can very quickly take a look. And there it is actually. It did save it to the database. It just didn't force it to the front end yet. Okay. So I do have the ability now to take a look and be able to analyze what got changed. Right. The other nice thing about all of this is for some reason, if you wanted to and you wanted to roll back and restore an older version, you could actually do so. So pick an older version and basically take it and move it up in your object history and make it the current object, and it will basically take over at that point. So lots of different things that you can also do here, right? So code rollback is also something very useful. At this point, let's jump over and let's take a quick look at a number of additional tools. Let's go into the object tools here. We have the ability to renumber objects. I'm sure that all of you have done this in the past, where you may have an object and you may need to move it from one object number to another. And as you know, you can do that quite easily using the object designer and just manually changing the ID number of an object and just simply pushing it through. Here you can do that as well, but you can also do it in a batch mode. So you can also pick a number of objects and do it all at once and simply do a mass transfer of a set of objects from one number to another. We also have the ability to renumber fields. As you all know, that you can also do that in the Object Designer. However, one of the things that's interesting, though, is in Object Designer, when you are renumbering fields, one of the things that you need to do is potentially drop the data out of the table for that field. Often you might be changing the data type, or perhaps you're moving it somewhere else with a different data type. So often, as part of changing the field number for a table, you also have to export out the data, delete it from the table, introduce the renumbering of the field, and perhaps changing the data type, and then moving the data back. In this particular case, our tool will allow you to renumber fields with data in place, assuming that, of course, the data type doesn't change in that case. We're not going to do an automatic cast from one data type to an unknown data type if it's something completely different. But in any case, the key thing here that is really different is the ability to renumber the fields while the data stays in position. Update variables. Another useful function. This allows you to find all of the unused variables in your choice of object or range of objects and be able to eliminate them. So basically a global approach in deleting all those variables and cleaning up your code. The other thing that you can also do is have the system go through and move all of those variables that were marked as global, but in fact should be local, and it will just go through and update all those flags for you as well, should you want it to do it. Let's move on. A few other things we want to take a look at in the base tool. Let's take a look here at this data tool section. We also have the ability to essentially write macros. So we can create in here an action worksheet, and you can create basically by creating an action group. In this case, we have one here that we're already in. Create a number of different steps. And as you can see, you have many different things that you could do within this particular action group. And as I said, imagine this like a macro. So you have the ability to do all sorts of things to your data, to your objects, in order to help either prepare the system for certain kinds of usages, or perhaps to reconfigure things to behave in a certain way in your particular development environment, etc. So, or maybe other types of functions that you want to be able to repeat. Coming up in our upcoming release sometime, I believe in version 14 in the fall release, may make it, might not, I'm not quite sure. We're also going to add execute PowerShell, so that'll be another interesting one that will be available coming up. We also have a permission wizard. So yes, you can also very quickly create permission sets and develop it based on a group of objects and be able to record that and generate that permission set in a very simplified manner. I'm not going to turn that on, but it's basically a wizard, walks you through the process, records all the objects that are touched, and generates a permission set based on the objects that are used within the code, as well as from interacting with the process. Let's go down to transports. So transports is basically the ability to package your code. So what you need to do here is set up a project. And once you have a project set up, now what you can do is you can actually gather the different objects that have customized the data, or customized objects, or other objects, even if they're not customized, and basically be able to package them together and deploy them in an organized manner. So typically you're probably used to doing this manually using FOB files, where you would typically walk through the object designer, select a number of different objects, whether manually or filtered out by certain criteria, select a set of objects, and then export out to FOB. In this particular case, we can export that way out, but manage it in this fashion. But not only can you deal with FOB, here we can deal with a file format that is custom to us called an FIB. An FIB is a wrapper around an FOB, so it can contain an FOB, but it can also contain other things like documentation and other bits of data, or even, for example, that action worksheet that we talked about earlier. So we also sell a component of OMA that can go on client side, which can ingest an FIB file, and if it also includes something like the action worksheet, be able to take it and act on it on the inbound side. So you can actually manipulate the environment going into a system. So that's also very interesting. Let me close this out. There we go. All right. So let's get to the real meat and potatoes of today, and that is to talk about where's Microsoft going, and why are we having this conversation about OMA, and why is it interesting at this point? Well, OMA's been around for quite a while, and it's loved by many developers. And one of the things that we as developers, if you already know or perhaps don't know, is that Microsoft officially, as of this fall, in the Business Central version 15, Business Central fall release 2019, I guess. There's so many different names that Microsoft is currently using for the product, and they seem a little confused as to which one they want to use. But in any case, in Business Central version 15, officially, Cal code is no longer supported. The object designer is no longer accessible, the dev client, that is, and you can no longer write in Cal code. You must be writing AL code using the new interface for development for Business Central, which is VS Code. So let me do that. I'm going to open up VS Code in the background for a moment. So just give me a second, and let me just take a look. Where is it? I just need to pull it open. There we go. Okay, so this is our good friend VS Code, right? And the whole idea here is in VS Code, this is where you're going to write code. You're no longer going to write code using the Seaside development environment. All right. So in here, for those of you who have already worked with VS Code, you can come in here and very quickly create a project, right? Sandbox project, basically a hello world, and be able to come in here and start writing code. Okay. We won't be going into writing code and how to write code using VS Code and writing AL code. There are many other resources for that particular purpose. We as a group will be looking at methods of maybe perhaps also addressing partners' desire for more training. So perhaps you can also talk to us later about that particular topic. But in any case, today we're looking at how this is going to work with OMA. So as you can imagine now, this development environment is completely different than what we had previously, and a bunch of other differences. The code itself, as you write VS Code, is essentially text files, and they're being stored typically on a local drive, but perhaps in a repository like Git, using GitHub, or maybe you're using TFS or some other kind of repository. And unlike CalCode, which was the development was inside Business Central, VS Code is external, and all the code is external. Again, unlike Seaside and CalCode. So this makes things very interesting in terms of how are we going to manage this. So let me show you what we're going to do. So I actually have previously, let me just take a look here, a little a USB stick. Let me just see, where is it? I'm just going to grab it. Here we go. Okay, so a USB stick, which currently already has a Hello World in here. So there's the Hello World application. And again, nothing really added to this. This is pretty much base. So here I am back in my Object Manager Advanced. And what I'm going to do now is, if I go to Objects, you'll see I actually have now an option called Extensions. This is brand new as of this past spring, starting with OMA version 13. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add basically an extension here, which is the app that I'm working on. And to get to it, I need to go to my Hello World and point to my app.json file here. Okay. Upon doing that, I have now basically linked OMA to my project. And in fact, it actually found that I had written this page extension inside that particular application. All right, so it already knows that it's there. So let me now hit OK, and I'll go to Object Explorer. And now what I can do is actually, you'll find this view, Object Explorer, as I mentioned, is synchronized to my Object Designer, but it's more than just Object Designer, and it contains extra fields and extra pieces of functionality above and beyond what the Object Designer can do. And one of the fields that we have is actually a field called extension. It's a Boolean field, and in this case, I'll just say yes. And you'll see that it actually found that list extension that is actually in my app. And in this particular case, just like what I used to be able to do with my base objects that were in Seaside, this is written in AL. What I can actually do is, up in the ribbon, is I can click on Design. And guess what? Yep, it opens up my VS Code and actually opens up the object and allows me to go in there and make changes to that page extension object. What do you guys think? Ooh, ah? Do I get some responses in the chat window? All right. Let me continue. As you can imagine, at this point, if I make any changes inside my AL code, just like before, this will get saved back into OMA as well. So let's just say here, I'll just add 2 exclamation marks here, and I'll just save that. So I'll just exit out of my VS Code. And now what you'll see is back here in my Object Explorer, if I check the history, I believe, I think it's just a timing, it hasn't updated yet. What we will get is, just like before, an updated entry for my change. I think it's also because this is from my tests, probably from this morning. And that's why you see so many other entries. All right. So this now gives you the ability to actually manage all of your objects, not only just Seaside and Cal development, but also for VS Code and AL development. So if you think about this for a moment and think about the fact that This is Business Central version 14 spring release. This is the last version of Business Central /NAV that has the Seaside development environment. As I mentioned, Business Central 15 this fall will no longer have the Seaside development environment. This version is the last version and the only version worth talking about that contains support for both Seaside development and AL development. And now what we've done using the OMA tool is essentially provided you with a development interface that will allow you to access development in both environments at the same time. So this is really all about hybrid development. All right, and what you'll see over the next few years, we will continue to support this version and this tool set to help partners and customer get through this transition from going from customized CAL code to all AL code built on top of events and extensions. So this is the tool that you will need, and this is the environment that you will need in order to make that jump. All right, so let me take a look at a few more things here. So we looked at being able to develop in AL. We took a look at some of the extensions and developing inside the AL code. We talked about the ability moving forward to look at history both in base version of Seaside and as well as looking at history in AL code. Let's move back into OMA and a few more of the feature sets that exist here. So I'm going to switch back and jump back to table 18 for a moment. Okay, and give me a moment here, just control home, there we go. And customer table. Actually, what I'm going to do is I think, let's take a look here. If I go into where used, first off, is I now should also see, if I scroll down here, and again, depending on the update of that object into my code, okay, no problem. Just checking on some of the settings here. Okay, sorry, ignore me there for a second. What I wanted to show you also now is a function here, which is check guidelines. Built into our product is also the ability to support all sorts of standardized guides. Built into the product already is the standard support for guidelines as published by Microsoft and Navision back in the day. And what you can actually do is for any given object, whether custom or base, is to run the guideline check. And when you run the guideline check, not only can it check standard guidelines, but you can also add your own. You can also have your own custom guidelines, perhaps specific to your particular development environment or development style, and maybe the way that you choose to organize or deploy your information. So in this particular case, we can see that against the customer object, we have 48 comments. Okay, so all sorts of different comments in here. So for example, here, there is an end in the code, and it's actually saying that perhaps we should add a semicolon to that end in order to make it more complete. Okay, so and I believe, here we go, stretch out the code window, there we go, right? And in fact, when I look at the code, that actually is probably not a very good way of writing your code. Yes, it's valid, and that is the last end in the inside that trigger. And by definition, the last end could actually be missing a semicolon, and it's actually valid from a statement perspective. But from a cleanliness and maybe from a standards perspective, perhaps you might want to consider that gets cleaned. Oh, one moment here. I see a bunch of questions. Let me see here. Let me start with the last two, and sorry, Jose, I'll go back and perhaps answer that one later. I'm not quite sure what that was in reference to. Is it possible to use and import the OMA application as an extension into BC15? The answer is yes. OMA is also being built to run as an extension, so it can be run on top of 15. Obviously, you won't be able to develop inside Seaside and CalCode, but it fully supports AL development. So for OMA, there's essentially a branch. There'll be a branch that will continue running on BC14, supporting the hybrid environment, and then there will be an OMA for pure AL development starting with BC15. Running hosting BC15 in the cloud, well, this allows us to inspect the database objects as the legacy development environment won't be accessible. Okay, a couple different pieces in here. BC in the cloud. So first of all, BC in the cloud, I guess I'm going to need clarity on that. BC in the cloud could mean private host, or BC on cloud meaning on Azure, Microsoft SaaS. So first off is our tools, although you could import them onto BC on Azure. There are components currently, I'm not quite sure actually how all the pure AL version of Business Central, or sorry, OMA will work on Business Central 15. Currently there are components that are needed on the middle tier, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to work on Azure yet. So I can take that away and get some clarity. That's still under development, the pure AL version that's coming out this fall, and we'll have to look at some of that. And will it allow us to inspect existing DB objects? So that's another good question, is as Microsoft itself moves into this AL environment starting with BC15, and its desire is to basically make all objects inaccessible, at least from a development environment. I haven't actually looked at what is going on yet with our BC15 release. I will also take that away as a question, and we can answer that directly afterwards in terms of the exposure of the actual objects, even if you can't write code to them. Okay, so I currently don't have an answer for that. I can get that clarified for you. Okay, were there any other questions? Did I miss any? Okay, so if there are any other questions, please feel free to type away, and I will continue. The guidelines, not only can you do all these guideline checks, but you can also automatically apply guidelines. So any of the recommendations that are being made, you don't actually have to manually go in and fix them, although you could, but by clicking on the apply guidelines to selection, you can go ahead and do so. All right, a few other little topics that we'll cover, and then we'll open up the floor to more questions. We also have the ability, let me just backing it out of all this, is we do have the ability to, for a given extension, so let me just go there. Perfect, and let me come back into this particular model here. For those of you who need to worry about going into product creation and developing some sort of app, one of the things that you might need to worry about as you try to get into AppSource is obviously supporting all the requirements that Microsoft has to meet minimum standards. And part of that could be around the requirements in what's needed to support multi-language. And multi-language moving into the future is going to be all done through XLive. So XLive is the ability to basically take what normally would have been in captions and move it off into XLive files and manage all of the multi-language there. So we actually do have components here that will allow you to also manage XLive, and you can have the ability to pull out of captions inside your AL files and move it to XLive and be able to manage the XLive files and be able to do all your multi-language components there as well. Let me just see if this is actually going to work. I'm not sure. And yes, in the background, if I come over here, it created this translations file. So you'll notice over here, it actually created my 2 translations. And in this particular case, if let's see if it'll open this up for me. It should open up in XML in a browser. So let me just take a look here. Browser opening up somewhere else. And there it is here. And you'll notice that there is my translation here. Okay, so it fully supports XLive and also allows you to manage that for all the different languages that you need to support. All right, one other feature that I will talk about here, which I think is going to be very important and dear to everybody's hearts moving forward. And that is, for example, let us say that I have this object. I'll just pick salesperson purchaser, random table here. Okay, so one of the things that we have built into the product, and I know that this is a hurdle for quite a few partners in terms of trying to move into the future, and that is, if I've got cal code written, how do I get to AL? Well, you'll notice up here, I actually have a function called export AL file. So let me go ahead and do that just as an example to show you what's going to happen. So what I'm going to do here is, you'll notice that it's going to create a file .al, and by default it's pointing to my USB stick. So let me go ahead and save it there. Okay, and in the background I am going to open up my VS Code and just show you what got pushed. And here we go. I'll open up that AL project. And let me just see here. I have a feeling it's probably because it got pushed to the wrong folder. 1 second. I will open it up this way. I'll just push it from the folder that it went to the actual project folder. So I just pointed it to the wrong folder. 1 second. Just give me a moment. I am in the background just simply going to take that and I will move it. Oh, you know what? This was the one I created from before. That's why. You might remember I created a manual one as part of my demo. So give me a second. Actually, let me open up a folder here. I'll point it to my H. That's what's wrong. That's pointing to my local. So that's the one that I had just created. I really should have done this. There we go. There we go. That's much better. And there it is. There's the salesperson purchaser code table. Okay. So the point of this is, yes, you can take objects in AL code, and it will actually translate it for you in from CAL to AL, right? So we are currently still refining some of the translation. There's little tiny bits, but it's largely there. Call it 98% there. There's, I think by this full release come this fall, we will have almost hopefully 100%. And we're still getting feedback from developers and partners as we have over the last 6 months, and we continue to refine it. But it's extremely good in terms of its capability to export to AL. Now, in this particular case, you might be wondering, well, we exported out a table, in this case table 13, but isn't that a base object? I mean, in reality, moving into the future, you would never create an actual AL object in the base range. In other words, I wouldn't be creating another table 13. Probably what I'd be more interested in is in a real life situation is that In table 13, or in this case, if I go back to table 18 for an example for a moment, in table 18, you may remember I added a bunch of fields, right? And maybe I even added code in the background. And therefore, wouldn't it be actually more useful that I'm not exporting out the entire table, but in fact, what I should be creating is a differential, right? Really, I should be looking at my customized fields and only pushing out the differential, in this case, because it's a base object, of the custom versus the base, and using that differential, create a table extension object in AL. Wouldn't that actually be the correct way to do it? So the answer is absolutely correct. And we're hoping that by the time that Tech Days comes around, we will be able to demo. We already have it working right now in inside in our dev environment. We're just tuning it up. But essentially the way it is going to work is from the history is that you will be able to choose which version of modification that you want versus, for example, the base, or perhaps some intermediate version, just because maybe there's certain things that you want to keep. What you can do is there's going to be a button that basically now says create the AL file from the differential of these two, and it will create, in this case, a table extension. And not only will it create the table extension, so that at that point lives in AL, external to your CAL code, but then we'll take the base CAL version that you've selected and move it into the current version. So the concept being is that you would take your AL code, push it as an extension back into your application, and it would work on top of this base version, right? And basically your CAL code would be deprecated and be replaced with whatever the base is that you choose. And moving forward, all of your customizations would now live in AL code. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of what I want to show for Cal and Al. I want to quickly jump back to my slides for a moment, and I do want to talk about one particular image slide that I actually created. I created this slide as part of a presentation that I did at Directions North America in the spring. And this is my recommendation for partners and customers moving forward. And that is, you currently are, well, customers and partners ultimately are trying to get to Business Central to a version in which the underlying version can be upgraded at a moment's notice. And I'm just generalizing by calling that version Business Central vnecks, right? It just simply means at some point this is you're on some version and the underlying version is just going to update without thinking about it. But currently, most customers, partners, ISVs are over on the left-hand side. You have customization on top of NAV code. And this customization is what I call inline cal code, meaning the development was actually done in the actual code base. Right, so the customized code lives with the base code, so it's all inline. So my recommendation moving forward for partners, customers, and ISVs is first off is do an upgrade. Upgrade the existing code as is to BC14, right? And BC14 is the hybrid environment which contains the Seaside development environment as well as your VS Code AL development environment. Okay, so both development environments are supported. So do an upgrade. Okay, get to this new version of BC14. And actually, moving into the fall, when Microsoft is pushing BC15, I still recommend that anybody that is coming from a traditional customized environment on Cal Code move to BC14. Okay, once you've upgraded to BC14, then my recommendation is live in BC14 for as long as you need to. In other words, you don't have to do this move to BC vNext in 6 months. Nobody says you have to. Maybe you do it over 2 years. Maybe you do it over 5 years. Okay, there's no pressure, unless of course Microsoft comes up with some sort of licensing constraint. But in any case, what you can do is live in BC14, and now you can refactor with OMA. Take that inline cal code and start moving to events. Okay, and then once you've moved to events, take that events and move it to AL code and extensions. And once you've moved 100% to all AL code and extensions, then you can peel off the back end Business Central version 14 and apply whatever version of Business Central at that point you would like to. And at that point, your application will be living 100% inside AL code as an extension. So this is pretty much my information on the product.
Thanks, Floyd, for providing us all that great product information. I know that was a lot of information for everyone to take in really quickly, but hopefully there are some areas of the tool that you think would help you and your team. Please reach out and get in touch with me at ndetmer@iden-na.com, which you can see here on the screen. I can provide you with our pricing, training, and onboarding options at any time after the session's complete. Thank you all for coming. I hope to hear from you soon.